What I want to talk about here is the most dangerous aspect of the abuse cycle, or the most vulnerable point in a trauma potentially becoming PTSD type of scenario. And this is a difficult one, so we'll have a go at it. But what I want to say is that the most dangerous enemy of a healthy healing of a traumatic incident is on the inside, and I'll explain why. It's most common for people who are abused as adults to have experienced a similar pattern of abuse in childhood, and B, a pattern of being blamed for the abuse, and C, being told that it is not abuse. So these are three different waves of abuse. So A, you are abused. So physical violence, verbal humiliation, sexual abuse. Sexual abuse has many different layers, by the way. Many people don't understand that a parent's arousal pattern, using a child for arousal, even if they don't stick a penis in your mouth, is a message of diminishment. It is a message that my superiority, my sexual pleasure, etc., is more important than your well-being, more important than treating you as an equal, as someone valuable. One of the biggest areas that my father abused all of his 5 children was in the exposure of the child to situations they had no experience in and couldn't deal with, for the entertainment of the adults that he brought around as guests. And so, a nice evening for my father would involve bringing various children out, asking them questions that they'd had no frame of reference from. Now, this is more obvious when you realize that they isolated us. Classic case in Canada, when my father brought the family to Canada, where I couldn't work legally. I'm 14 to 16 years old, couldn't work legally. And then called the police and said, I need to contribute money to the household. Slight problem, he's let my passport and visa expire. So I'm now an illegal alien that is under his guardianship, who cannot handle this situation. It's hard enough for a teenager to go out in the workplace as it is, but in an illegal country without a visa, and he calls the police on me and complains that I'm not contributing and this and that and the other. And this is a kind of humiliation. Or let's have Dane tell what he thinks about this. In other words, they didn't have a TV in the household. They thought this was good Waldorf parenting and stuff. So you have all these setups where the child becomes an object of ridicule or an object of humiliation, rather than supported in bringing forth your dignity. Now, when you combine that with beatings of a sensitive child, with all kinds of setups, with a constant message that life is would have been wonderful if you hadn't been born, basically, it's there. And then you say this is love. You should be so grateful. I'm doing this, and all this kind of dynamic. There is an absolute agony and misery in the child that is further punished, because if you bring it up, he's got the superior intellect to make you feel completely small. completely useless and miserable, and then laughed at, but punished if you stick up for yourself. Now, it's this punishment if you stick up for yourself. Don't you dare talk. I get to humiliate you in public, but if you dare to say a thing about me, you're not only a horrible child who's ruined my life, but I'm going to punish you, I'm going to hit you, and so there's this message that I'm going to abuse you and make you feel like shit. Then I'm going to laugh about it and not protect you as a father, a healthy father should. And then I'm going to humiliate or torment you if you try to protect yourself in any way. And then I'm going to call the whole thing love. And because adults of all kinds in a sociopathic environment, such as our culture, are standing around watching. And then particularly when people are involved in the New Age movement. So my father would have channelers over, and they'd participate in this bullshit. He'd have, or even add in, like how, wonderful my parents were or something. And so there's this endless message that we're on the bleeding edge, the cutting edge of the culture, and you're so lucky to be born, while the felt experience is complete helplessness. I was suicidal by the time I was 14, watching this dynamic and having it continually. My father never took responsibility. If his wife did something stupid, it was my mother who did something stupid. So what I'm getting at is, when you have a culture participate in this kind of abuse and participate in the ennoblement of the abuse, wow, you're so lucky to have a father like yours. My father had all kinds of nice little labels. The director of an organization called the Cultural Freedom Fund, or a member of the Anthroposophical Society. You have all these labels. And then you have the adults witnessing childhood abuse. And then you have the physical violence, sometimes witnessed, sometimes not. And you have zero emotional connection, and there's minimal support. And there's also minimal context when you take away the radio, when you take away the TV, when you act superior to the rest of the world because you're in the New Age or whatever it is. It's a very confusing environment for children, to say the least. Now, then I had my channel, Lazarus, who would tell me that I was creating my own reality at age 14 by my beliefs. In other words, if I would go into the room of beliefs and change the belief there, that my parents would stop abusing me, that suddenly my visa would be renewed and I could make money, and then he would talk about all the payoffs we had, so it wasn't that his techniques didn't work. It wasn't that it was a bit cowardly to try and have a personal relationship for money with a tape recording sold to a teenage abused boy who we're not going to bother to get to know, and we're not going to have it a mutual relationship where you get to talk. No, I get to do all the talking like Dad, and you're creating it. Look for your payoffs. If there's anything wrong with your reality and our visualization technique didn't work, it means you didn't want it. It means you had payoffs. So you have the whole laced up stuff around this, to the mix. And of course, it's not called abuse. It's called the most high resonance to ever touch the planet. And don't you dare, I remember expressing some anger in the Jack and Lazarus forum with the channel and stuff at Lazarus because of some of these types of things. And there was this whole community ready to jump on, 18-year-old Dane who actually had the guts to say that some of this stuff didn't fit right. So we don't want to talk to you. Stay off the forum if all you have to do is say bad things about the wonderful Lazarus. And it doesn't seem it doesn't seem to register to anyone that if Lazarus really is the greatest deity to ever touch the planet, he doesn't need protecting. But perhaps an 18-year-old boy who's shaming himself for inept techniques does need protecting, and nobody's doing it. Because what happens in many channel communities, including the Lazarus community, is there's this secret thing because nobody's winning using the techniques. If all you really had to do is go into the room of belief and all that, the channel wouldn't have to have a security guard to keep disgruntled workshoppers from coming into the workshop. He would just go into the room of the 33-second technique or this and that, the other, and change his technique, and then he wouldn't have disgruntled people at the workshop or this or that or the other. But of course, it doesn't apply to the channel or to the channeled entity, just to the participants who are suffering and paying money to feel worse about themselves and who are not given a voice to talk about it. So we have the compounded abuse there. And then we deal with the ineptitude of, different therapists, etc. My first lover relationship. She said, we were having some conflict. And she said, you need to do some work on yourself. So she sent me to this woman who spent 4 hours at $100 an hour telling me how terrible men were, and then hung up. So I had 4 hours of listening to all these horrible men. And I said, really? This was supposed to help me? And she said, well, she hates men. I guess she's not all that good. But just go ahead and pay her. It's like and there's this ongoing process of exposure to bizarre circumstances, which the high school system doesn't seem to be concerned about preparing you for anything useful in life, etc. Now, when you've had this sustained message that you're worthless, that your feminine self as a man is something to be ashamed of, is something that probably doesn't exist, that you are the enemy, if anything's bad's going on, it's your fault. And you need to go and pay some money to someone to get it fixed. This is a recipe. When the insanity of this does not get addressed, the fact that, no, I don't feel loved after this. No, I don't feel supported by this. No, that didn't feel good either. When that cannot be acknowledged, because your feelings in a ranking system, in the political dynamic of a relationship, well, you're just a useless wannabe who's trying to become evolved with this great channel, or you're just the idiotic child that this parent is tearing their hair out in order to, these kids, who's talking about these parents? But you don't have legal authority, you don't have the money. It is a forced boot camp in which your three basic needs in Maslow's hierarchy, survival, security, and belonging, is totally controlled by a multi-layered sociopathic environment with your parents, the culture around the parents, the witnesses that participate, in which the child ranks last. And this is, your government may require your parents to get a driver's license to protect their car, or to protect someone else's car, or to protect another adult's life. But they do not have to get a parenting license. They don't have to be so psychologically healthy. And my experience, and this is, again, bizarre in the Waldorf environment, one Waldorf teacher sent me down in the cellar and said I'd be eaten by witches. Good Waldorf education. Another one said, put your hand in the desk, slammed the desk on my hand, and then when I complained to my parents, and they were always upset. My parents were always upset when anyone else hurt me. But they always lied and blamed me when they hurt me. And that's what the Waldorf teacher did. She said, well, I thought you would remove your hands. So let's shame the child for doing what they're told, which they have to do or they get beaten. And then I'm, of course, a troublemaker. You see, so when you have this message over and over again in the culture, what develops is a self-abuser protector that basically looks and assesses the situation and says, this is a sociopathic situation where people in power will kill you if necessary to avoid a disruption of their power and to avoid The deepest law of all in my family was that my parents should not have to feel any of their traumatic feelings unresolved from childhood, and that anyone who made them feel any of those feelings by expressing their healthy responses to this and that and the other would be beaten within an inch of their life, would be punished, would be blamed, would get the message, basically, that we do not want you to live. And what this protective persona develops in this environment is an awareness that unless we collude with the abuser who has the power to ensure that you survive, that you are secure in your survival, and that you are at least receive the label of love and belonging, because parents usually feel guilty after beating a child or whatever, particularly if they're new age parents. And so the first thing they have to do to assuage their guilt is explain to you how it's all your fault. The second is forget that it happened or pretend that it didn't happen. No, I never said this, that, and the other. The third thing they have to do is in some way say that it's necessary and that it's loving. Because parents feel good if they're being loving. They feel bad if they're being abusive. Now, since intergenerational abuse patterns, both of my parents had incredibly sociopathic parents. So if in an intergenerational abuse structure, if this cannot be dealt with in a culture that refuses to own its shadow, beginning with our government refusing to do anything to rehabilitate my grandfather, who came home violent towards my father. And this was just fine by our government because we had been violent adequately to the rest of the world, and now we can just send violent people back to abuse their children and deny that PTSD. You should look at the history of governments denying the psychological impact of warfare and refusing to rehabilitate. We do not care about children to even rehabilitate our veterans. We do not care about the Iraqi children who, having been traumatized into PTSD in their parents by murdering 500,000 innocent Iraqis by our own estimates. We do not care about the Iraqi children who are going to be raised with parents with PTSD. Millions of children are going to get the pent-up helplessness, hatred, and rage that they could not healthily express to the Americans for invading their country and being a weapon of mass destruction in search of a weapon of mass destruction that never existed until we arrived. They are going to dump that on their children. That's what happens when, the greatest country, we're number one, moves on and finds our next victim. Now, in this environment, the protective persona says that if I want to survive with sociopathic idiots that don't have the character to stand up for a child, I've got to know the rules. Now, the first rule is I can't tell the truth, because all hell breaks loose when I actually tell what I feel, what I think, why I think it. No, we can't tell the truth. Now, this usually, in the initial adaptation of a teenager or whatever, moves into sullen silence. But see, parents, this isn't good enough, because if you're being sullenly silent, it implies that there's something you could say that you're not saying, and I don't want to feel like I'm such a bad parent that you can't honestly talk to me. Of course, I am such a bad parent that you can't honestly talk to me because I've beaten you and lied to you and this and that and the other. But I don't want to feel that way. And so the next process is then to start coercing the teenager to smile, to look at the bright side, and to say how wonderful they are. Could you just talk to me? You don't want to hear what I have to say. Oh, yes, I want to hear what you have to say. Please tell me. Well, I didn't like this. What do you mean you didn't like this? And they're furious again. Okay, you don't want to hear what I said. No, I want to hear. And parents don't know how to resolve. Inept parents in our culture that don't get a single class in parenting except from their own abusive parents, certainly don't know what to do in these types of situations. Should read some of the parenting books from 30, 40 years ago. Spare the rod, spoil the child, all this stuff. Alice Miller is a great window into this insanity. And so you have this sustained dynamic, basically, where the only reason you're alive and have not been pulverized into, intense, basically experienced viscerally that your parents are afraid of you. This is a very difficult thing for a child. I remember a number of instances where I would gently point out things in my parents, and they went white because there was nothing wrong with the logic, and they were just devastated that somebody saw what they were doing. And it was like they'd do anything, bribe me this, don't talk about this, anything. They went into a tizzy. And when you're depending on people for your core human needs, survival, security, belonging, and you realize just telling the truth, sends them up the wall. Who wants to be the target of that? And then when they're telling you it's because you're bad, you've ruined our life, it's a very shaky foundation when not a single adult will advocate for you in this whole process. Now, the learned protector, when you go into a new social environment, is figure out what these assholes want. Figure out what I can't say. You've learned how to betray what is good in you, what is authentic, and what is in integrity. You've learned to mask the body symptoms that tell how you're actually feeling. You've learned to say the opposite of what you mean. You've learned to pretend that it's wonderful. And then you go out into a new situation. And when that's what's kept you alive, the default mode is to see, okay, I'm in a new situation. These people can't let me talk about this. And they can't let me talk about this. They can't. Now, what happens when we try and break the rule and actually be healthy and actually say, no, this feels like absolute shit, is that the repressed trauma of a lifetime erupts in the body with the message, you are going to die. Now, this is what happened with me and the high facilitators. I tried to talk about this. No, I'm ready. No, you're wrong about this, etc. I tried to talk about the most blatant, obvious shadow that my paid therapist, unlicensed and undisclosed, was sexually abusing me. Well, this, of course, could not exist possibly. So there's all the defense. And I would, anyone who's in tune and watched this type of power dynamic will see the signs of anxiety. They will learn to read the cues. And so I learned that to keep safe, first of all, because I consider myself honest and intelligent, I had to hide a lot of it from myself because it doesn't make sense to my conscious mind that this is going on and that I'm not talking about it, because I'd start thinking, well, wait a minute, I'm paying money to be helped, not to be abused. This doesn't work. And so a lot of it has to be kept unconscious. That's part of the protector's job. Because children, even when we're learning these body cues in childhood, they understand that if they really understand it consciously, a child may just blurt it out. So the protector's job is to read the scene, read the level of sociopathic behavior around them, understand the contract of abuse. The contract of shame is Dad will humiliate me. Then he'll ask how wonderful he is. Then he will say, isn't it great that he's that wonderful? Because he needs to hear how wonderful he is, and this and that and the other. And then nobody's going to talk about it. And his feelings are super important. My feelings have no value. And so if I have a feeling I need to do this, and then if I have something to say about that, I need to say it like this or not say it at all. And if he makes a mistake, I've got to apologize. And then I get to live, basically, and be told I'm a halfway decent son from time to time. Get a little bit of love and belonging, as opposed to the rage that, you're no son of mine and you don't belong, which devastates and creates shame and destroys the ability to function in the world. And so there's this contract that gets formed. And an abuse survivor will unconsciously expect that if they have grown up in a culture that ubiquitously extends this contract and protects the abuser in the form of the parent, that that's just how this world works. Now, this is a person ripe for abuse. In some cases, an abused child will feel more comfortable with a narcissistic abuser, such as Peter Sandhill, than with a healthy person, because if the child learns that they've got to satisfy the abuser in order to live, and that this cannot be talked about, and that this was love, and that can't be talked about, because that's a bizarre definition of love, if they can't please the abuser, they're going to feel something's wrong. I'm going to be punished. I'm not doing it right. So someone who doesn't need to be pleased may actually make the abuse survivor a little bit unsettled. Now, this is why a good training and therapeutic protocol is absolutely essential for every single professional in this field. It doesn't matter if you're doing Reiki, it doesn't matter if you're doing acupuncture, because an abused person, say like I did acupuncture and I felt woozy and dissociative for 3 days afterwards. I told my acupuncturist. Now, she was a seemingly nurturing presence. So when you've been abused as a child, you want to be around a nurturing presence. Only she didn't want to hear that, you see? So, now there's a choice. Do you disown another nurturing presence because they don't know what they're doing, and they're not going to give you a refund, and they're not going to, and they make up this stuff. Sometimes that's because you're integrating. They just make up stuff. And it's never that they made a mistake. This is very, very important, particularly if you're low ranking. Now, if you're a top professional, it switches. Now they're afraid. Now the therapist is afraid. If you are a top licensed therapist in your field, and you can watch this dynamic, they will second guess everything, expect that it's not right, defer to the expert and all this, and you watch your therapist do this. But then when it's just you and them alone, if it's not working, it's all your fault. And this is implicit. I mean, how else do you justify not giving a refund? I did a terrible job. You shouldn't have done that. Worked for me. I've made your life worse by making you woozy and dysfunctional for 3 days, and that's why you paid me. Bye. It doesn't add up. So it gets pivoted around towards the abuse survivor. Well, they'll just make something up. And if they had a movie camera on them right now and knew this was going to go on national television, they'd probably have to think of something credible or give a refund. But when it's just you and them, and they're in this role where they're the one with the power, finally, they were probably abused by their parents, and they've got the title now, so it's somebody else's fault. And you go into this dance. You learn very quickly. I worked with 30 practitioners. None of them ever made mistakes, by the way. None of them ever apologized. If I would say it's not working, they'd all have a story. And it was always a different story. So that's the value of working with 30, is you start to see the pattern. And most of them, of course, want to do good, like to think of them doing good, and so they'll invent a noble story. But the bottom line is, it's your fault, and you're going to pay for it whether you were helped or not. That's the reality in this field. In California, in England, Washington State, wherever, Findhorn, doesn't quite work. It's your fault. It's a learning opportunity. And you have to pay me, of course, to have this learning opportunity. And that's the way it goes. So this is a continued message, you don't matter as much as me. Now, nobody's doing the healthy protocol. For example, with the acupuncturist, one possibility is that they triggered movement towards a traumatic incident that I was not ready to deal with. Surprise, surprise, because no one's told me about trauma in this culture. Nobody has identified deep repressed patterns in this culture. And so the acupuncture is pushing my body in the direction of the compartmentalized emotion. But then the protector is pushing back. So now we've got a dissociative dynamic going on because we have not prepared the conscious mind for what will come up when this energy starts flowing. We haven't prepared the protector for the fact that hopefully we are not going to be murdered for having this truth come out today. We may have been happily murdered at age 6 with our father, who would accidentally, of course, drop the axe when he's enraged that you're telling the truth and asking you to hold the log of wood. That's when the shadow comes out. But here at a psychotherapy, you're probably not going to get murdered, but your protector doesn't know that. And you can't talk to your protector when you don't understand that they exist, and you don't understand that they exist because you've been told that there is nothing to protect, absolutely nothing. This is the shame base of the perfectionist parent that doesn't make mistakes. Now, you come into high where I write this 8-page letter, and of course I get immediately pushback. No, we don't want you on team. Now, is it because I'm not as intelligent? No. Anne has said you're a genius at self-awareness. You don't want a genius of self-awareness on team? No. I don't get the feeling, says Sarah Sandel, that you'd have my back. Whose back? If it's the back of the community that wants to have things unearthed and talked about, the fact that I've written you an 8-page letter telling you that I think you're exhibiting superhuman shame dynamics because this team member is crying about stuff that is actually your responsibility, and this person is scared of being punished, and this is going on. It just doesn't seem right, and it could be this. They couldn't reply to this. So they just pushed me out a little bit. So I got the message, okay, we're dealing with abusive people. And of course, we can't talk about it. So I can't fully own it, because how can I pay money to go to workshops if I'm being abused? That won't add up consciously, so I've got to suppress that because I'm meeting some needs for belonging in the community. Some things are working. And this is the crux of a place that is very good in some way and terrible in another, is if you don't have another alternative, then the bit that's very good will draw you in, and then the bit that's toxic will be suppressed because you lose the one without the other. And it is a human need to belong. Now, the other big vulnerability in this point is language. When you've had language messed with hatred and betrayal and fear called love, you don't use the dictionary definition. You use the definition where the word has been applied in your life. And surprisingly, it's an interesting dynamic. Anne Watts said that she'd never loved anyone except her family as much as me, after just hurting me in the most amazing ways. It's this interesting dynamic where when you really slam it to someone and don't quite know what's going on, I love you, that people say the word more than, nothing's happening at all. And I'm not hurting you or anything. I love you. Why not then? No. Well, let's save that for when we've really done one over on you. So the most dangerous part of this whole terrain for me was the awareness that every interaction that I had with Peter Sandhill, Anne Watt, or the facilitators was an interaction that devalued me. I just listened to a recording again of Peter saying, he realized I was trying to help him. And, that's because I was explaining over and over and over again what he was doing wrong, how he could do better. And so he was acknowledging that despite the fact that a month or so earlier he had railed at me with Felicia facilitating a dump that told me, I want nothing to do with you. You're ruining my life. You don't, get out. I don't want you as my teacher. I don't want to learn from you. I don't want anything to do with you, which is a huge message when you're regressed into that wound. Because when you're 6 years old again in the wound, you're back to that point where without this person, I'm going to die. And he took that as the chance to dump all of his hatred and fear on that 6-year-old. So there's this very difficult dynamic where there's an emotional dependency from the psychedelics, from falling in love, from the lies, from not understanding the language, and from the fact that this has been my community of belonging. Then there's this pent-up anger about all the betrayals, all the lies, all the abuse, all the blind spots that have been dumped on me and that I've paid for. Now, this is very, very delicate when your conscious mind doesn't know any of this. And of course, it doesn't know anything of this at high because they don't talk about this. This is not apparently relevant to people having healthy, loving sexual relationships, despite the fact that a large percentage of the participants and team are sexual abuse survivors. I don't know why it's not a very relevant thing to talk about. It just isn't. That's part of the high contract of shame and abuse. This doesn't get talked about. Now, the most vulnerable thing is that part in us that expects to be killed for breaking the rules sets up this very dangerous dynamic where if you don't break the rules when you're in an unhealthy and abusive environment, you're going to die. That actually triggered the thing. When I almost got in a traffic accident from bursting into a level of emotion that I didn't know was there and didn't know where it was coming from, and I'm driving 75 miles an hour and I didn't see it coming. I'm thinking, oh my God, something has got to be done here. And I say, hold me and listen to me. I think that'll do it. Now, this would, in a healthy environment, people would be right there unpacking it all, right? But they were right there saying, no, this was your choice to deal with Peter. I know we trained and recommended and all that, but your choice was actually to trust us. And you did this on your own. You didn't do this in a high workshop. Now, yes, we just recommended him in the last high workshop 2 weeks ago. And yes, he broke his high agreements. And yes, we trained him. And yes, he broke the law. And yes, this is, but it's not a high issue. So you deal with this alone. Now, this is horrific. And it is telling the 6-year-old, yes, I'm going to die. I broke the law. And Peter's right there. I'm never going to trust you again for the rest of my life. For what? For telling the truth? For breaking the contract? So he doesn't go in exactly what I've done that's wrong. This would demystify it. Peter and the high facilitators will stay silent systematically in this terrain. Just talking to another abuse survivor with high, and they say this, and she asks to see the protocol they're using for trauma. They won't show it to her, because it's not a very good protocol. You see, anything that's a little bit suspicious, they're dealing with their own traumatic abuse protocol, where they're going to die if the truth comes out. You see, because the child has the thing, I'm going to die if I tell the truth, and the abuser has the thing, I'm going to die if the truth comes out. Now, in this situation, I've had my inner abuser and my inner coping strategy saying, don't say anything, curl up and die, frankly. Get in a traffic accident, anything, but go through this. Don't break these rules. Because deep humiliation, shame, blaming, the amount of insanity, the mental cruelty that my father was capable of is and was worse than death. That's what led to the suicide. Literal agony and pain on a chronic level without the ability to get any redress or be heard about any of it. Because I'm in a culture of collusion. I'm in a culture where the child does not matter, where the innocence does not matter. And it'd be nice to say that changed at high, but it did not change at high. And when I asked for help, and Anne, my therapist, she's worked with me with 5 relationships, finally shows up. She doesn't believe me in the first session. She talks like a lawyer. She doesn't call initially at all. She goes to a meeting and doesn't take a stand that I'm there. She's not fighting for me. She's fighting for her fear and her side of the abuse contract. And she says, when I say, I think I should tell people, See, this is the healthy self. She says, no, we're not. We're not telling. Why? She says, why do you have to tell someone? She says, we're not even telling the people at the office. I realize, oh my God, she's in it too. There is not a single ally that's going to stand up for me, and I know what that's like. And what does she use to cover it? She's doing this because she loves me, right? Fucking asshole. Cut this cowardice out. Come out into the light, you fucking cowards. See, this is what needs to happen, but you see, I just broke the rule. And there is a terror like nothing you can imagine that's behind that contract. There is a shame. There is a trauma like nothing you can imagine that's behind that contract. And the protector is trying to do everything. My protector will happily run me bankrupt so that I won't have money to pursue this. My protector will happily get me in a car accident so I'll be distracted. My protector will have me stuff myself with food, will do anything but break the contract that he's certain will get me killed. Now, a therapist can play on that. Someone like Anne, who's listened to my fears, can know exactly what honey to give me and exactly how to twist that in a way to bring up that fear if she wants to use that for her agenda of protecting herself from the secret coming out. She can do that. And this is what makes this evil, is when the people you have paid to be your allies, the people who are professionally obligated to take a stand for your true self to come out and break the contract, actually turn on you and use all of their muscle as a whole group to silence you and tell you, no, you're worthless because I have an agenda here that's more important than your life. Now deal with it. And then, oh yes, and I love you more than I've ever loved anyone else. This is a very dark game. It would be so easy to see this stuff. Just read a trauma book, read a psychotherapy book, and you instantly, oh, that's not good. Oh, escalating a sexual relationship with a client, recommending illegal drug, pushing them. Oh, none of that's very good, is it? It's obvious. But it's so hard to get to this point where the obvious can be let in. When you depend on a community for your need for love and belonging, when you're in PTSD and trauma, when you need community support more than you've ever needed community support, and the price dangled in front of you is your silence and your lies and your willingness to betray yourself again so that they can be more comfortable and pretend that they're doing a great job so that they can feel good about themselves and get out of their own trauma that they haven't dealt with. This is the vulnerable point, and this is why I'm fighting. Well, one of the reasons. It's one of the reasons that I'm fighting. I know that I could have died very, very easily in this thing with my own protector. There would be moments when I'd feel this desire to speak this, and suddenly my motorcycle would swerve, and I realized, oh my gosh, some part of me is trying to murder me because it feels safer with me dead than speaking the truth. That's how aware that protector is of this sociopathic environment. So the greatest enemy is often on the inside, and that's difficult to deal with because it doesn't make sense. It's crazy making until you do the studies and the research to understand. The Undervalued Self by Elaine Aron does a great job of portraying some of this. But can you own it in the middle of PTSD, in the middle of a meltdown, as your body is not functioning, as the only people you thought were safe are disowning you unless you buy into the contract again? When you get a contract from Jason Weston saying, I promise never to tell anyone and never to sue high. Can you it's obvious what they want. It's just, it seems like that's going to kill you when you're in that amount of pain and it had nothing to do with you. And it's all being blamed on you. And it's leading back to that suicide dynamic. And when you write on NorCal Announce, I want to die, and I want help killing myself because my relationships at high aren't working, because I'm exhausted, because I have chronic fatigue from holding all this contract. The contract from Peterson's 1993. The pain of failure and trauma illiteracy. And Jason says, high isn't a trauma issue. Trauma isn't a high issue. And not a single team member or facilitator says, gee, maybe we need to look at our protocol if you've done 100 events and are this much traumatized by using our techniques. Maybe we need to learn from you how to do our jobs better. And we don't want you to die. And here's your way out. No, when not a single person says and is willing to own anything, the message is clear. We're quite happy for you to die as long as you don't break the contract and spill the beans. You see, so of course the antidote is once you can understand what you're dealing with, once you understand how much terror is in there, once you understand that your 6-year-old is doing his best to keep you alive by killing you, by threatening you in every possible way, don't tell the secret, don't tell the secret, then it's a cinch. Break the contract, tell the secret, bring it out into the open, do what is the right thing, say what went on. Anytime you've got an authority figure advising you to keep their abuse secret, you don't have an ally. And this is the most dangerous thing, is when your enemies, through the use of misappropriated language, something that is shoved into a child, they feel this and then they're told, no, they don't feel it, they feel this. When that is shoved in over and over and over again, and then someone uses the right keyword, it has nothing to do with whether you feel loved. I did not feel loved by Peter or the facilitators in the entire experience. I felt betrayed, small, let down, lied to, physically depressed, hurt in every possible imaginable way, in pain mentally, trying to figure out how they could possibly think this was not worth apologizing for. This is evil. It felt evil. It's the most painful event I've ever gone through. And some part of me, from beginning to end, has pushed and pushed and pushed to sacrifice my dignity, to sacrifice my value, to sacrifice my truth, to sacrifice my body and my life if necessary, so as to protect my abuser's secrets. Now, my father just died, having told me, in response to trying to show up for him, I thought, seems like this is one of your last chances to deal with a little bit of your bullshit. So I brought up 45 minutes recording of different abuses, this and that and the other, to all the siblings, this and that and the other, the repercussions, the amount of money on therapy, the whole thing. He says, thank you for your nice letter. I've loved you unconditionally since the day I was born. He got one better than Ann Watts. She just said I was the next person loved over her family. My father, no, that's not good enough for him. Unconditional love, not humanly possible, by the way. If it was unconditional, it wouldn't be about me. You love Hitler just as much. It's on condition I'm not Hitler, It's not humanly possible, but let's just go for more grandiosity. And let's just call love and all the beatings, let's just call it all love. Then I can die in peace with the closing punch of I'm going to fuck you up and then die. Wonderful. My mother doesn't like dealing with any of this. She can't stand it. Oh, you made me cry. I can't. This really upset me. I don't want to deal with any of my tears. I hate it when I cry. Stop doing that. But how are you doing? Tell me how you're doing, right? The double message, meaning don't tell me how you're doing. Tell me what will make me feel good. Oh, and she loves it when she hears about, she'll probably sue the facilitators because it'll be so great to blame it all on on somebody else. She loves it, and she'll say, oh, that's outrageous. I'll say, Mom, it wasn't as bad as what you did. And then she's silent, right? Nothing to say. You see? Anne is outraged by all the indignities of the world, but not particularly outraged by recommending Peter Sandhill to me and then voting to hire him again after she's well aware of what she's capable of and setting up more people to be abused. Not particularly outraged by that, you see? It's sick. Now, this is all normal. This is all normal. It's going on right and left, the children in your lives, etc., right and left. I have a very privileged childhood compared to many people, and to some extent I would agree, which just makes me wonder what the fuck are other people having to go through? If it nearly killed me to go through what I went through, I haven't been raped multiple times in the anus by my father. There are kids dealing with that today. Some of them end up on death row. There's an interesting corollary between young boys in America who have been sexually abused by older men. 50% of the people on death row have had that experience. That tells you what a big wound it is. Because an American boy does not know how to deal with that when they're humiliated to that extent, used to that extent, and then shoved into a sociopathic culture that doesn't teach them how to deal with their feelings and shames them when they bring it up and tells them they're a sissy for the feelings they're feeling. That is going to go out and cause murder. And it does. Those men who experience this level of abandonment and sociopathic betrayal by this culture open up and mow people down. And it is nothing to the pain that they have felt their entire lives and have been systematically silenced by you, by me, by the fact that we give a fuck to do the most basic trauma literacy. And of course, it's not a high issue. It's not a Waldorf issue. It's not a parent issue. It's not a government issue. No one wants to deal with it until they mow their child down, until they mow you down with a machine gun. And it's their one moment of release and authenticity to give back the hostility and the rage that has been drilled into them since birth and called love. Well, here's some of that love back. I feel enormous compassion for these young men. And I feel sick with the level of sociopathic evil that facilitates this and allows it to go to this point where, the high facilitators sue me to shut this down from tarnishing their great reputation. I'm sure my parents would have sued me as well. My mother could even take issue with some of this, and but it probably grate a little bit too much, and it's not denting her income. So who cares? She can live in her partitioned world. But this is a big issue. Talking about this, and of course, when you talk about it, everyone gets scared because you're breaking the contract. Oh my God, someone's talking. It's scary to people who are still enchained in an abuse contract that's too dangerous to understand. Now, the most vulnerable people are going to have this happen to them the most. That is just the way it works. They're most familiar with the contract. They'll actively seek out people to reenact the abuse with, because it's not safe for them to call it abuse. Some part of them has bought into the insanity facilitated over and over again with Peter, whatever he does when he's in a corner, how much he loves me. Whatever my father does when he's in a corner, how much he loves me unconditionally. This is not love. It is evil. It is cruel. It fucks people up. And to take people's money to do this is a crime worse than death. What are you going to do with this message? Will you take it and negotiate with the part that's keeping you in your secrets and lies? Oh, this has nothing to do with me. Oh, I wouldn't want to rock the boat. Oh, I don't want to confront the facilitators. Let's just say nothing. Be a part of the secret.